guess, former/current UFC welterweight Dan Hardy. He's also a commentator, joins us from the United Kingdom. Dan, this is a little bit of history for the 5 Rounds podcast as well. Did you know that this is your second appearance on the podcast, and you were the first guest that we've ever had on twice? So congratulations to you on that. Thanks for coming on again.
Wow. Is that right? I feel really quite special now.
Yeah, let's rewrite the Wikipedia page after that.
You didn't know it was such a big day, did you? Well, Dan, we got a whole lot to talk to you about, but the first topic I wanted to get to right off the bat is, I was in attendance for Bellator 170. I was cage side to see Tito Ortiz submit Chael Sonnen right off into the sunset, his career finale. After that fight, you open up Twitter, and of course, a lot of people are saying that fight was fixed. And it's not the first time I've opened up Twitter and seen, a large contingent of MMA fans saying that looked shady to me. But, one that stuck out to me and also to a whole lot of people was something you wrote as soon as the fight was over. And I'll go ahead and read it off now in case any of our listeners didn't see it. You wrote, the Bellator 170 main event was more choreographed than a Britney Spears music video. Shame, really. It might have been a fun fight. Now, I noticed that since then you have deleted the tweet, it looks like. So my question to you is, why did you delete it, and what did you mean originally by that tweet?
Well, it was a very reactive tweet, and to be honest, I was being quite flippant at the time. My first instinct when I watched it was that something was very unusual about it. There were a series of events that led me to believe that something very different was going to happen, and when the fight played out, it just looked very unusual. It looked very strange. It didn't seem like a real fight between two guys that were really trying to fight, And so straight afterwards, I tweeted that, and the reason I've deleted it is because I used the word choreographed, which obviously, and this was raised yesterday by our Ariel Helwani. It insinuates that both guys, had a discussion before and decided this was how the fight was going to go down. And in hindsight, I don't think that's the case at all, especially seeing Tito's reaction after the fight. You know what I mean? He seemed frustrated that he didn't let go of the choke. John McCarthy had to pull him off Chael Sonnen. And it was almost like he just, I was, it's the same thing with tapping to strikes. I've been discussing this on Twitter all day with people. I don't like to see someone tap to strikes because I feel like if you're conscious enough to tap, you're conscious enough to work out of a situation. So if you're choosing to tap, then you're not there to fight. You've not come to be tested and to put everything on the line. And if some people want to compete as athletes and if they find themselves in a difficult situation, they want to tap out, that's the safety net that mixed martial arts offers. And I can't condemn someone for doing that. It's just not the type of fight that I choose to watch. And with all the trash talking that went into that fight from Chael Sonnen and how he really sold this huge story about how much it meant to him to beat Tito, to finally get this opportunity to prove that he is the fighter that he's always said he is, and then just to roll over like that, it was really disappointing for me.
Well, Dan, don't forget, BJ once said only a taps to strikes, right? I just wanted to support you on that.
It's just, I just don't like to see it. I don't like to see it. I feel like if you're going to tap to strikes, if you're going to tap to a submission that's not in, you didn't get in there with the right intentions.
And you mentioned there that his reasons for doing so don't matter. Whether he made that decision prior to the fight or at some point during the fight, it doesn't really matter why he chose to, basically give up is what it seems like you're suggesting. But even if you say it doesn't matter, it's something that Brian and I were discussing earlier on this podcast is, what do you think? And I know that this is just your opinion. It's not something that you necessarily have insight on in terms of Chael specifically, but when you look at the situation and the circumstances surrounding this fight, Dan, you're a smart guy. You're around the sport all the time. You're an analyst. What do you think happened here? Do you think Chael had the best intentions, but after 3 years off, he got in there and maybe he's been turned into a house cat and you get punched in the face one time and you don't want to fight anymore? Or do you think that, it's some confidence thing or some physical thing? We know that, he's had a checkered past with PEDs. So how much does that come into it? I mean, what is just your personal opinion of what we saw on Saturday out of Chael?
Well, there are so many different ways it can go. I mean, my instinct, especially after listening to his interview on the MMA Hour last week, he was talking about how training camp was more difficult, and at some point the sport is done with you, and that's very true. You know, we've seen it several times with guys that want to come back and fight, and it's obviously a question that I have to ask as well. I mean, I'm only 34, and I've never ever used performance-enhancing drugs, and I've never tested positive for anything. So that's not an issue I have to take into account. My body's still pumping more than enough testosterone around my system to put me through 10 more training camps. But I have to ask questions about Chael. I mean, you know, there is a correlation between guys that have abused synthetic testosterone in the past and guys that are not producing testosterone now and were also on TRT. You know, I mean, TRT could potentially be a result of testosterone abuse in the past, surely. So, you know, these are questions that you've got to ask. I mean, Chael was joking. It annoyed me that he was joking last week about the fact that, you know, he's getting credit for passing a drug test. I mean, it's not funny. I mean, we're trying to clean the sport up. We're trying to gain credibility. And, you know, it just seems to be one stupid decision after another from these high-profile athletes.
I still think that Chael's greatest value to Bellator right now would be as an athlete, you know, and whenever that day as an athlete ends, well, then, of course, I think they could definitely use him as a front man for the promotion. But I think in the meantime, you know, they're interested in selling his fights. You know, the Spike just released numbers today. 1.8 million people watched that fight between Tito Ortiz and Chael Sonnen. So it does seem like we're in sort of this weird kind of transition period where we know that Chael can go on and be a very successful promoter for them. It's just, can he still be a fighter at this point in his career, and does he still want to be a fighter? I mean, that almost seems to be like the question, right? As we're discussing this, is that does Chael want to fight anymore? Because Saturday it looked like he did not.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, this is the question, and it would have been awful of him to have not realized that until the gate closed and the fight had started, because, you know, I mean, what a terrible situation to find yourself in. But he didn't come out like a deer in headlights. You know, he came out and he pressed the action straight away.
Yeah, and do you think there's a pattern here? Because with Bellator, this isn't the first time, right? Like the Ken Shamrock Kimbo Slice bout had that situation where, you know, Ken's got that choke in deep on Kimbo, and it looked like it was all over, and then it just sort of gives it up and loses by knockout. And even, you know, the Ken Shamrock Gracie, the one they ran back, had that quick stoppage that kind of came out of nowhere, didn't make a lot of sense maybe to a lot of people. Is this a pattern?
I don't know. It's certainly a pattern of questioning, and I think that's worth looking at. I mean, you know, I'm not the only person that the first reaction was something was fishy about that fight, you know, and it, like I said, in hindsight, I don't think it was. But if this consistent questioning is coming up, then we need to wonder why. And it almost seems to me like, I mean, Bellator, especially with Chael Sonnen on board, who has a very pro wrestling style of promotion, it does seem to kind of skirt along the lines of pro wrestling, especially when they're matching up these, you know, these big old guys who are like, you know, like the stars of old, you know, like when you've got Hoist coming out against Ken Shamrock. Like, Ken Shamrock was done when he was fighting in Pride. You know, Ken Shamrock had no business coming back and fighting Tito in the UFC. You know, it's like, I remember watching him coming over and fighting on Cage Rage as well. It's just, I don't understand the value in rolling out these guys, because, I mean, we're just going to see old boys getting injured, and I don't want to see that. I mean, if guys are competitive, like Dan Severn is a very different kettle of fish. He fought smart all the way through his career and fought well into an age that most people would be retired. And you can have a damn good conversation with Dan Severn, and he will take you on a journey of all different kinds of stories that he's been and life experience that he's had. That's a guy that's fought into old age and has done it in a smart way. And I'm more credit to him. I don't think there is necessarily a limit for a mixed martial artist. But as Chael Sonnen said himself, you know, you might not be done with the sport, but the sport might be done with you. And I think a lot of these guys that are headlining these main events for Bellator are, well, they're done. I mean, just, you know, let's move on. Let's look at some of the great athletes that Bellator do have. I mean, Paul Daly, Michael Venom Page, they've got Roy McDonald. I mean, I want to see more of these guys fighting if Bellator are going to be, you know, if Bellator are going to be doing something in the world of mixed martial arts. I want to see legitimate fights with good quality fighters, and not old boys that are just trying to cling on to a dream that's past.
Yeah, I mean, they are starting to put on some better fights. I mean, you mentioned Paul Daly. Of course, he had a spectacular knockout against Brennan Ward, and, you know, we're big fans of Brennan Ward as well. We think he's a quality fighter. But it does seem like when they go to these big events, you know, a couple times a year, who's headlining? You know, I mean, they've got Fedor Emelianenko headlining an upcoming card, and that is their big, you know, quote-unquote tentpole event. And they're doing it because of ratings. I mean, as long as people tune in and watch this, they're going to keep doing it. But I mean, I'm with you, Dan, and I think Brian is as well. Well, actually, no, I can't say Brian is as well. Brian loves it.
Yeah, Dan. Full disclosure, Brian, meaning myself, lives for this type of what I call MMA pornography. But I have to admit, there's a downside, right? There's a foul aftertaste that comes with taking part in this, and then the competitors, like you mentioned, taking part. So I get it.
Yeah, Brian has a saying, the sloppier the better, and that's just something that he and I have to disagree on a weekly basis. One thing, the last thing I wanted to ask you about this fight is this weird kind of tap moment where Chael's in the front and Tito's sort of turtled up and it looks like he's looking for some kind of choke, to set up some kind of choke, and videos caught this and the internet went wild about it. Is that Tito sort of did this quick little tap and then Chael immediately changed position. Dan, you're a fighter. You understand these moves and these strategies better than we do. What did you make of that moment? Was that a big moment to you? Was that a sort of an eyebrow raising move, or was it just kind of one of those weird things that just sort of happens in a fight? And Chael was probably going to change position anyway. What did you think of that whole thing?
Well, interestingly, the first time I watched the fight, and this was, and I didn't see that until after I had posted that Britney Spears tweet. I didn't see that the first time around. Like I felt that it was an unusual fight before I saw that, and I tweeted the tongue-in-cheek Britney Spears comment, and then someone actually tweeted that video back at me with someone slowing it down and pointing it out. I don't know. I mean, it didn't look like he tapped Chael directly. I can't think of another reason or another circumstance in which you would do that motion though in a fight. I can't think there's a value to it in any way. You know what I mean? Like you're wiping sweat off your eyes or something. It wouldn't be that motion, which is why I think it stood out and why a lot of people have gravitated towards it.
We've all seen athletes sort of quote unquote quit in the octagon. I mean, I think anybody who's been watching the sport long enough, sometimes you don't even have to watch it that long. It happens. I mean, this is a cage fight. Somebody wants an out, and sometimes they'll take it. I was wondering, listening to you talk on the MMA Hour earlier this week, you had mentioned about reading guys' body language and their their facial expressions and trying to read their confidence. Does anything stick out to you? Like in all the locker rooms you were ever in, did you ever look at a guy and say, "Oh, that guy's definitely losing. Yeah, he's not here. I mean, I don't know where he is, but he's not here in this locker room thinking about this fight." Does any one scenario stick out to you?
I can think of a couple of scenarios. I mean, I certainly won't give any fighters' names out, but there are certain traits, certain things that people do. And the thing is as well, each different fighters have different, pre-fight build-ups, and it can. I mean, I get pumped up. I love laughing and joking, and then about 10 minutes before the fight, I get very serious, and I just want silence. I want my space, and I just want to be with my thoughts for a minute. I've seen guys puking up in buckets and crying in tears, and then going out and knocking some dude's head off.
Wow.
And I've seen guys sitting there falling apart on a chair, going, "What if he does this, though? And what if this happens? And what if this happens?" When this guy should be dominating the world, you know what I mean? And goes out there and falls apart. There are certain people that just don't have it within them. But then there are certain times when you're watching a fight and you can just, and you'll know, you've watched enough fights as well. I mean, you've got to think, between us, we've probably watched, 500,000 fights? I mean, it's something ridiculous like that. You just get to the point where you can kind of feel what's going on. You can connect with the emotions of the fighters. You can look somebody in the eye, just like you can read a micro expression of someone that you know. You know what I mean? Like a family member or a loved one. You can read their face. In a fight scenario, when you're tuned into that mindset, you can pick up on those things as well.
Hey, Dan, switching gears a little bit, late last year, of course, and I do this every year, I write out what are the top fights I want to see in the upcoming calendar year. And I know that you are, as much as anyone, a huge fan of this sport, and obviously you study these different fighters. Give us your top 4 or 5 fights in 2017. It doesn't have to be a fight that's already made, or it could be a fight that's already made. It can be any promotion, any weight class. What are 4 or 5 matchups that you think are just the cream of the crop, spectacular fights that we could see in 2017?
That's a great question. Well, first off, I have to say I'm really glad that Mousasi's matched up with Weidman. I think it's well overdue to see him get a crack at someone respectable, someone in the top 5. So Personally, I really want to see Mousasi fight Anderson Silva. I know this Derek Brunson matchup's coming up, and I'm intrigued about that, and we're doing a breakdown of it for Inside the Octagon. But the fight I really want to see is Mousasi v. Anderson Silva, because I've been watching and studying and learning from both of these guys for so long, and they have such intriguing games and such strong mindsets as well, that to see them to compete against each other would be a real interesting chess match for me, because they're both very, very talented, but they're both also very, very intelligent and good at deconstructing fighters, and like I was talking about a second ago, good at reading fighters and setting them up. I mean, Anderson Silva knocking out Vitor Belfort is the one that always comes to mind. How he sold him on that low kick, and it was a work of art. Let me think. So who else we got? Well, Amanda Nunes, I would love to see her face Kat Zingano. I think that's a fight that needs to happen. I think Amanda Nunes would want that fight as well. I know Kat Zingano's a little bit estranged to the fans at the moment, but she's always up there. She's definitely in contention, for that belt. I feel like she could have given Ronda a better chance if they'd have fought again. It was such a confusing turn of events that she sprints across the octagon. And I think she has a lot more to offer. Much like Sarah McMahon, I think she's a lot better than she shows. But obviously Nunes has already got that win. Holloway Aldo has got to happen. I need to see McGregor fight El Kakui or Khabib. I'm impatient to see that. I would love to see McGregor rematch Jose Aldo as well. I want to see Duo Choi back as well. I was really, really impressed with Swanson, with Choi's toughness in that last fight. But Swanson, it was one of the best performances of his career, in my opinion. But I'd like to see Duo Choi back up there in the mix. I was expecting to see Choi against Rodriguez at some point. And if that works out, that would be a fascinating match.
Oh, that's fireworks, right?
Rodriguez.
That was on my list as well. Yeah, that exact matchup was on my list. Yep.
And if I could be a real nerd, I would want to see Damian Maia against GSP. That would be probably my top matchup.
Yeah, some fascinating matchups, of course, and there are, going into every year, but those are definitely some good ones. Hey, before we let you go, we wanted to mention that you're an author now. You got a book coming out on March 23rd. It's called Part Reptile, UFC, MMA, and Me. What got you to do this? Can you talk about the process just a little bit? And, just, I guess, tell us about the book. Tease it a little bit.
It's been a bit of a whirlwind, to be honest. It was, I was actually looking at an email chain with my editor when we were first discussing it, and it was April of last year. It's been a very quick process. I've been writing for a while. I've written for magazines and newspapers for some time. Even when I was fighting, I was writing for Fighters Only regularly. So I enjoy writing. I enjoy the process of writing. I'm always inspired by great writers, and I would love to be able to put something out with my name on it. And I've got a few things in the works. I've got probably 4 books that are about 70% complete, that have been things that I've been working on for a few years, that are they're not at that stage where I'm ready to hand them over, ready to be printed. It seems like such a big step to finally commit a manuscript to printing, because you can never take it back. And that's the thing that always is in the back of my mind when I'm working on them. And when this idea was actually brought to me by a chap called Richard Roper, who works at Headline, and he was very interested in my story, within and without the UFC, of all the things that obviously he was drawn to it because of the sport, but then researching my individual story, he was interested in my pursuits in Peru and the boat race and my trip to China and all these kind of things. So he contacted me and he said, is this something that you'd be interested in doing? And he made some recommendations. He said that it might be best to work with a ghostwriter with this being autobiographical, and he gave me a few options. And I connected with a writer called Paul Gibson, he's a boxing journalist and a very, very good writer. And we've worked on the process together, and it's been extremely challenging. It's taken me on a journey that I had not expected, and taken me to back to memories that I'd not thought of since they happened. It's been a bit therapeutic in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of very personal stuff in the book about my career. I mean, my career is the backbone of it, because it's the backbone of my life. as it says on the blurb on the back of the book, my life is signposted by fighting. It always is. You know, when people remember birthdays and Christmases and that kind of stuff as punctuations of a year, it was always fights for me. You know, it was always, who was I fighting? What training camp was I in that particular moment? And that's how I place things on the calendar in my head.
Well, again, that book is out on March 23rd, and I have to congratulate you on that achievement. I'm looking forward to reading it. You always struck me as one of those guys who really explored, you know, every depth of the martial arts. You know, you didn't just stick to what you were good at, and you know, just kind of let that carry you on. I know that you were always a guy who was sort of you know, exploring everything. So I think it's going to be a terrific read. I look forward to it. And thanks again, man, for coming onto the podcast for the second time in 5 Rounds history. Always a pleasure speaking to you, and I'm sure we'll talk to you again real soon.
No worries, my friend. It was good talking to you anytime. I hope I'll be the third guy to show up. The one guy to show up the third time on this podcast.
And hopefully I see that red mohawk one more time in my life, Dan. That's all I'm saying.
It would be nice, you know. It would be nice. I would like to grow it out one more time. I will tell you that.
There he is, Dan Hardy. All right.